Let's talk about patents. You know, one of the things that I've learned is that when there's something that I'm conflicted about, the best and most civilized place to get input on that is the YouTube comments. So I do want to hear your opinions on this, but before you start typing out your take on what the current patent system does or doesn't do well, hear me out. Because, the situation of patents stopping specific products from existing is something that has been bothering me and a lot of people, basically ever since hobbyist grade 3D printing became accessible with the RepRap project. But as time moves on, I'm having a harder and harder time universally just condemning patents and the companies that use them. So, of course, the RepRap project only got started because that core patent on building parts from molten plastic using a 3-axis CNC machine, that patent from Stratasys ran out. Essentially, the tech was already there in the 90s, but nobody else was allowed to freely use it commercially because by holding that patent, Stratasys owned a federally granted monopoly on using that FDM process. Because, well, that is essentially what a utility patent is, right? When you come up with a novel idea, you can register that idea and be granted the exclusive right to exploit that approach for up to the next 20 years. So the theory is that that protects you from copycats that could take advantage of your development but wouldn't have to invest into research and development. Of course, the consequence for anyone wanting to buy a product with that technology, the consumer, then is, since the patent holder owns the monopoly on using that idea, they are the only ones making a product with it, and if they don't execute on it well and don't produce the best possible version of it, nobody else gets a chance on making a better one either. So in the end, you would be stuck with choosing between a mediocre version from the patent owner or none at all. And it gets worse when the best version would actually need to combine patented ideas from several parties into one. Like, that's just never going to happen. And I think that consequence is the biggest issue that I and most other people have with the patent system as it stands today. Sure, a patent holder can license that patent out to competitors, but they don't have to. And if they do, they can set up the terms however they want. So, for example, they could charge unreasonable license fees or demand that whoever they're licensing to, sure, gets to use that one technology, but in turn stops competing with them in another area. And unfortunately, those sort of shenanigans don't seem to be an exception, but the norm. There is one area where things work differently, and that is FRAND patents, F-R-A-N-D. And those apply to areas where not having access to a patent-protected technology would make creating a product impossible that needs to work with a set of standards. For example, for patents that would completely prevent competitors from, I think it was specifically, implementing 5G modems. Because a modem for a mobile phone is such an essential component, and a modem is needed to use the 5G standard, the patent holders in those cases are required to license out those technologies under fair terms, at reasonable rates, and non-discriminatory to licensees. Of course, as usual, what is actually fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory is up to the courts to decide. In 3D printing, we didn't used to see new products being protected by new patents. After all, most of the development was happening in the community by people who were just interested in the tech and wanted to see it progress. For example, the standard extruder of the time, the Greg's Wade line of designs, that probably had a couple of 100 different iterations of it. And when somebody saw a way to improve it, they would grab the design, modify it, and upload it again for everyone else to use. At one point, I contributed a change that improved how the filament was guided into the extruder. That change was adapted and changed again to be easier to use, and in the form of the Guidler, it then became the standard for how that style of extruder is or was being built. And I think that is a wonderful way to develop something new. But it only works when everyone involved is willing to donate their time and work for free. And that really only takes you so far. Many of the sophisticated, free for the user, non-patented and open source projects that drive lots of the 3D printing world, like Cura, Prusa Slicer, the Marlin, Clipper, or RepRap firmwares, and for example, mainboard designs, now all have either a company behind them that sells a physical product or have patrons or other funding sources. By the way, thank you to all the patrons that make it possible for me as well to produce content that I can give away for free. So, because even when it's free and quote, just software, it is never free to produce. Blender, for example, is a most excellent software, but also has 136,000 euros of funding available every single month. And while be it with or without the goal of making money off it eventually, it is the norm that you're able to start a software project with no budget or investment at all, other than the computer that you already have probably. It's not so easy when it comes to physical hardware. Sure, you could build and manufacture the parts for an early RepRap or RepStrap with a basic set of tools, but once you're trying to make something that's just a little bit more advanced, suddenly there's costs for making or ordering prototypes, buying equipment and machinery for that, and if you're planning on making that physical product actually available to people, you can't just upload it to GitHub. Suddenly you're renting and outfitting a physical space for development, manufacturing, packaging, and shipping, and since you're now a vendor and manufacturer, you've got costs for possibly getting certifications on your product and legal support. But you're also going to need someone for customer support, RMAs, logistics. What I'm saying is that when you're distributing a physical product to people, there's just always a significant upfront investment you're going to have to shoulder before you've made your first penny on sales. That's why things like Kickstarters or venture capital exist. It's a way of funding that second stage of development and then the initial distribution before cash flow sets in. So sensibly, what it comes down to is trying to get a return on that initial investment. You know, one of the things that stuck with me from my time in the automotive industry is, I think it was in a quarterly report meeting or something, is when the CEO said, "Our goal is to create value for shareholders." A company or a business you run is, by definition, a construct with the sole and primary purpose of generating profit. It's not about building the best possible product. It's not about making the customer happy, and it's definitely not about being an awesome employer. Its exclusive purpose is to turn a profit for whoever holds a share in it, be it the founders and entrepreneurs or VC or stock owners. They want to see a return on their initial investment. If you actually have to make a good product in that process, well, that's just one of the many means to an end. But I mean, wanting first and foremost an ROI is a pretty universal truth whenever anyone invests into anything. And one of the ways to make that ROI more likely, in a lot of cases, is by protecting that initial upfront investment and then the continued exploitation of unique new concept with a patent. There have been plenty of cases where a patent used as intended would have done exactly that. You guys remember hoverboards? Well, they were initially called hover tracks, but the original product got pushed out of the market it had itself created by cheaper clones. And on top of that, those clones would regularly catch on fire, ruining the reputation of the entire category in the process. The E3D Titan extruder. There were clones, or I guess more accurately, knockoffs, available before the original ones had even really started to ship out to buyers. And even before that, E3D had gained a bad reputation because cheap knockoffs of the V6 hot end would regularly jam when printing PLA. I mean, in all my years, I've not once had a genuine E3D hot end jam on PLA unless the cooling fan was being blocked. But somehow the stigma stuck with E3D, with them, that the V6 just wasn't suitable for PLA. So, I mean, I've been giving companies shit for patenting anything really, because the past experience with patents in 3D printing has basically delayed the tech by 20 years. And it's starting to look like new patents are about to do the same again with more advanced applications. But on the other hand, with startups being taken advantage of by companies with a larger legal department and more manufacturing prowess, again, I'm having a harder and harder time demonizing patents altogether. And historically, I think most of you actually don't care about whether a product is open source or patented. From what I can see, all that most people care about is being able to buy a decent product and possibly the cheapest version of that. Let me run through a couple examples for that. The Beal Touch. probably the first product in the 3D printing space that's been totally protected by IP rights and, yes, patents. When this thing originally launched in 2016, the patents on it were already filed, but it's a bed leveling sensor that seems to be universally loved. Then Ultimaker started filing a couple of patents in 2017, and they had to explain themselves, but at the time they had already, probably intentionally, priced themselves out of the DIY market. That would take offense to a company filing patents, so they played that out pretty smart. Then Loadspot, one of the most anti-protection share everything companies, they went bankrupt and were bought up. I'm not sure if the super open source philosophy was the cause of that though. I mean, yeah, and lastly E3D. They've toned down which designs they publish and how detailed they go. If you've ever tried to model up a V6 Hotend, you'll notice that the drawings simply lack some dimensions that would make them fully constrained. But there are also no tolerances or surface finish requirements noted, which would be important to produce, for example, a functioning heat break. So while the drawings are okay for making a visual CAD model, they aren't the source, the production files for the physical product. On the other hand, when companies release full source files for designs that are already the status quo, or just don't patent them, which shouldn't be possible anyways for status quo stuff, I don't think that is particularly useful either. So right now we are approaching year 4 of the every printer is another Ender 3 timeline, and that too in a way is stifling innovation. So because what I originally like to point out that not patenting things would lead to competition on who can build the best version of this concept, well, it turns out I was wrong there. It's not about who can engineer the best product. It's about who can execute on manufacturing it the quickest and the cheapest. And that almost universally is not the same group of companies or the same company that is also good at making it a good product. The one exception that comes to mind is Prusa, but they really are an exception, who, as far as I'm aware, are not patenting things because really they have no need to. But that is partially because, well, first of all, they are already well established. And also they live in the wonderland that is Eastern Europe and the Czech Republic, where you have both capable engineers and cheap labor available. Still, Prusa are also moving towards having their own ecosystem of open source but proprietary parts that are all integral to, for example, building a Mini or Mark III's and having it perform the same way. So even though the largest parts of the design are open source, it still makes it harder to replicate it, and then if all you did was to manufacture it cheaper, you would still be competing with a company whose costs are already low. So where does that leave us with patents? I mean, I can't reasonably keep blaming companies for registering them and using them as intended. After all, that's how the system works and is intended to be used. What they're doing might not be the way things used to be done, but it isn't illegal, and in fact, it is actively encouraged, if not required, by the legal system. It's a don't hate the player, hate the game kind of situation. So I'm gonna hate the game because the current patent system is broken. It's a remnant from, I don't know, the 17th century? 20 years of exclusivity probably felt appropriate back then. But actually in 1450, when the very first patents were issued in Venezia, it was just 10 years. But anyways, today the 20-year protection duration is the difference between, oh, I'm sorry, loading up this email on my dial-up connection is taking a bit long, to, oh, of course my pocket supercomputer has a mobile gigabit connection. Like, in the worst case, patents can elongate the innovation cycle where one thing is invented and the next thing can then freely build on that. That cycle, because of patents, can take 20 years, which is insane in a time where information can be shared with anyone on this planet in less than a second and in mere minutes with anyone in the entire solar system. Like, Mars isn't populated yet, but that's like a 27-minute latency worst case. We're just not sending around handwritten articles anymore that are then going to get published in magazines that take months to print and distribute like we did in the 1600s. So, while I don't think I'm the best person to give advice on these things, what sounds obvious to me is 2 suggestions that I'd have. First, shorten that protection span, do 5 years, I don't know, or 3 or something. That's still a long time, but honestly, if you've not made your money back in those 5 years, well, either you never will, or you're strategically holding back innovation just so you have a new marginally improved product to sell every year. Sound familiar? Also, make licensing mandatory, so extend that friend approach to everything. Somebody who wants to build a product should be able to do so, but pay the patent holders involved a reasonable price to use their IP under fair conditions. That way, the patent holder gets their fair share, and the consumer gets to choose the best product. And that's actually something that I would encourage the companies that hold patents in 3D printing today to start doing anyways. Offer reasonable licensing options to companies that want to build something based on your patents. And if you want to be really cool about it, make it public how much those licenses would cost per every item sold. So, okay, why am I making this video? First off, this has been a conundrum that's been bugging me and I've been wanting to put it into words for a while. But next week, I'm going to be live building a Voron 2.4. Really excited about that. And that entire build is going to be sponsored by Slice Engineering, and I'll be using their Mosquito Magnum Plus hot end, which is patented. And it has caused some stir when, as a patent is intended to be used, it was the reason for the Triangle Labs Dragon hot end to be taken off of Amazon and AliExpress. Some folks prefer the Dragon to the Mosquito, not because it's cheaper, as I understand it, but because it's easier to use in their specific application. And that's one of the things that I've already outlined, because Slice Engineering themselves don't make a Dragon-style hot end, and licensing the design apparently wasn't an option. It feels like the Dragon-style Mosquito is now being taken away entirely, even though technically it shouldn't have existed in the first place. I mean, I absolutely see the disappointment in how that went down. I would have personally preferred everything being available in as many versions and from as many sources as possible. But like I laid out, I also see the need for ventures for companies to protect the work they're putting into creating new things and new concepts, new patentable ideas. So I can't really take sides here. This is not a great situation, but I think it's because of a system that needs to be fixed. Was it too harsh on companies like Wham for going on about how they're starting to patent things? I'm not sure about anything anymore. This video is not going to have a satisfying end, but maybe we can reach some consensus in the comments. Maybe. In any case, tune into the live stream next week. And if you're there in chat and the topic of patents comes up, I'm probably not going to answer or respond to it on stream because it's just way too deep of a topic to properly discuss for me in the heat of a live stream. But I would appreciate it if you could point people to this video. Posting links is disabled in live chat, unfortunately, because spam, but I'm sure there are other ways to send folks here. So again, please leave your input below. If this video helped shed some light on the patent situation, give it a like. Get subscribed for more videos and for the notification when the Voron 2.4 build starts next week. Until then, keep on making, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.